Emma had just finished making herself a cup of tea when her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, the screen lighting up with a name she hadn't seen in months, Daniel, and for a moment she hesitated, unsure if she should pick up, the memory of their last conversation lingering awkwardly, but something inside her nudged her to answer. She pressed the green button, and immediately his voice came through, soft and uncertain, carrying a weight she could almost feel through the line. "Hey, Emma. I don't know if you can help me, but I need someone to talk to." He sounded different, older in a way that was hard to explain, but also fragile, like a man trying to hold himself together while the edges of his world had fallen apart. Emma sat down at the kitchen table, keeping her tea warm beside her, and said, "I'm here, Daniel, tell me what's going on." He swallowed, and then he began to speak, words tumbling out faster than he could catch them, about the breakup, about losing someone he had loved for 7 years, about the emptiness in his apartment. The silence that followed him from room to room, how he felt like a part of himself had been ripped away and he didn't know if he would ever feel whole again. Emma listened quietly, her hand wrapped around her cup, feeling the ache in his voice as if it were her own. She didn't interrupt, she didn't give advice yet, she just let him speak, because sometimes people didn't need solutions, they needed witnesses. Someone to acknowledge their pain and not run from it, and that night, she became that witness, letting his words flow through her, marking the rhythm of his grief. She knew him from college, from the days when they shared coffee in the campus library and debated over books they loved, and she remembered how he used to laugh easily, how he carried himself with confidence, and she realized that the man on the phone now was someone she cared about deeply, someone who had been lost for a while. Daniel told her about how he and his girlfriend, Sarah, had grown apart, the little cracks in their relationship that turned into walls, the arguments that felt small at first but eventually became impossible to ignore, and how, despite the love he still felt, he had reached a point where there was no turning back. He was heartbroken in a way that made the future look uncertain, and he admitted that some nights he couldn't sleep, that the quiet of his apartment made memories replay over and over until he thought he might break from the weight. Emma felt a pang in her chest, a mix of sorrow for him and something else, something she had buried long ago, a warmth that came from being needed, from feeling useful in someone's life, and she realized that she wanted to help him, not because she had to, but because she wanted to, because she couldn't stand the thought of him drowning alone in his sadness. "Daniel," she said softly, "you don't have to go through this alone. I can help you. I can stay with you through it, even if it's just by phone at first." There was a long silence, then his voice, a little steadier, said, Would you really do that for me?" And Emma nodded even though he couldn't see her. "Yes, I'll do that, I promise." And that simple promise changed the course of the night, the course of their friendship, and perhaps something more, because it was the first time in weeks that Daniel felt a flicker of hope, the first time he imagined that maybe he could move forward without feeling completely broken. Over the next few hours, they talked about small things at first, memories from college, favorite books, the coffee shop they used to visit on Fridays, and gradually, Daniel started to relax, the rawness in his voice softened, and Emma felt a strange sense of relief, as if by simply listening, by allowing him to speak without judgment, she had already begun to pull him back from the edge. Emma thought about how fragile life could be, how easily someone could feel lost when a relationship ended, and how sometimes what people needed most was not advice or distractions, but a steady presence, someone who refused to let them face the storm alone. She realized she wanted to be that presence for Daniel, and as the night deepened, she found herself reflecting on their friendship, on how close they had been, on the way he had always understood her without her needing to explain everything, and she felt a tenderness she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Daniel shared more about the breakup, the fights that had escalated, the silent treatments, the way he had tried to fix things but had failed, and how the final decision to separate left him feeling empty, unsure of who he was without her. And Emma, listening, felt her heart tighten. She wanted to take away his pain, to make the world feel safe for him again, but she also knew she could not. She could only stand beside him and offer him the stability he needed to find himself again. He paused, and for a moment Emma could hear him breathing, and she imagined him sitting on his couch, staring at the walls, the weight of loss pressing down, and she felt a fierce protectiveness, the kind that comes when you care for someone deeply. "Emma," he said quietly, almost a whisper, "I don't even know if I can get through this." And without hesitation, she said, "You can, Daniel, I'll help you, we'll do it together," and she meant it with every fiber of her being. That night became the first of many, as Emma and Daniel spoke late into the night, talking about memories, sharing fears, and sometimes sitting in silence, just letting the connection between them hold the space. And for Daniel, that presence was life-saving. It reminded him that someone still cared, that someone believed he could heal, that someone would not let him face his pain alone. As the hours passed, Emma felt something stirring in her heart, a quiet awareness that she was not just helping a friend, but also rediscovering a connection that had never truly faded, a bond that had been there since college, quiet and patient, waiting for this moment to return. And she wondered if this closeness, this shared vulnerability, might change everything between them. By the end of the night, Daniel was calmer, the edge in his voice dulled, the tears had stopped for now, and he whispered a soft thank you before they hung up, and Emma sat in her kitchen, staring at the phone, feeling a mix of relief and anticipation, knowing that helping him was only the beginning, knowing that there was more work ahead, more healing to do, but also feeling a spark of hope, a quiet thrill at the thought that maybe, just maybe, this night had shifted the course of both their lives. She made herself another cup of tea, and as the steam curled in the air, she thought about the days ahead, about how she would continue to support him, about how she would help him rebuild himself piece by piece, and somewhere deep inside, she knew that in helping him, she might discover something she had been missing too, a closeness, a warmth, and perhaps even the possibility of love. Emma didn't know what the future would hold. She only knew that this night had changed something inside both of them, that their friendship had deepened, and that a quiet promise had been made, not just to heal, but to stay, to care, to be there. And as she went to bed, she held that thought close, feeling the weight of responsibility, the sweetness of connection, and the trembling excitement of what might come next, because sometimes, the smallest choice, the simple act of picking up the phone, could set the stage for everything. And for Emma and Daniel, that night was the beginning of a journey neither of them had expected, a journey that would test their hearts, bring them closer, and maybe, just maybe, teach them both that love and friendship could exist in the same space, delicate and strong at once, and that sometimes, the first step to healing someone else was to simply be there. The night ended with Emma staring at her ceiling, the faint glow of the streetlight outside her window casting shadows, thinking about Daniel, thinking about the vulnerability he had shown, thinking about how she wanted to be the person he could lean on. And in that quiet moment, she realized that helping him might also mean opening herself up in ways she hadn't allowed before, a realization both thrilling and frightening, because when hearts connected, when trust and care ran that deep, life had a way of surprising you. Emma knew sleep would be uneasy, filled with thoughts of Daniel, but she didn't mind, because for the first time in a long time, she felt needed. She felt alive in a way that went beyond routine and habit, and she knew that tomorrow, the next day, and the days after, she would answer the phone again, she would listen, she would guide, she would care, because sometimes love started not with fireworks, but with the quiet, steady presence that refused to let someone face their pain alone. And as she finally drifted off, a small smile formed on her lips, because deep down, she knew that tonight was not just about Daniel, it was about both of them, about healing, about connection, about the possibility that even in heartbreak, life could open doors to new beginnings, and that sometimes, the heart knew the way forward even before the mind could understand it. After that first long night on the phone, Emma and Daniel settled into a rhythm that neither had expected, a rhythm built on calls that stretched late into the evening, texts that popped up at odd hours, and messages that carried small bits of reassurance, advice, and sometimes just silence, shared in the comfort of knowing someone was listening. Daniel began to open up more, revealing the raw edges of his heart, his fears, his regrets, and his longing for a future he didn't yet see, and Emma responded with patience and care, asking the questions that made him think, sharing small truths that reminded him who he had always been before the heartbreak, and it was in this back and forth that Daniel began to find the first flickers of strength. He admitted to her how he had neglected himself during the relationship, how he had let routines fall apart, skipped meals, avoided exercise, and pushed away friends who cared about him, and Emma, listening, gently suggested small changes, like taking short walks around his apartment block, cooking a simple meal, or calling a friend he hadn't spoken to in months, and at first, Daniel resisted, saying he didn't have the energy, he didn't know if he could face the outside world. But Emma reminded him that healing was not a sprint, it was a series of small steps, and if he tried just one step at a time, he could slowly feel the weight of the heartbreak lift. One evening, Daniel called Emma after a particularly difficult day, his voice strained and quiet, and he admitted that he had spent the afternoon staring at the walls, thinking about what he had lost, and how he had failed to save the relationship. And Emma didn't offer platitudes, she didn't tell him to just move on. Instead, she reminded him that loss was part of life, that heartbreak did not mean failure, that loving and caring deeply was proof of his strength, and she told him to sit with the pain, to breathe, and to let himself feel it without judgment, and Daniel, listening, felt a strange relief, as if someone had finally allowed him permission to be human. The weeks passed, and Emma noticed subtle changes in him, in his tone, in the way he described his days, in the faint smile that would creep into his voice, and it gave her hope. It made her believe that her presence, even from a distance, was making a difference. She remembered their college days, when Daniel had been ambitious and full of dreams, and she realized that beneath the heartbreak, he was still that same man, still capable of joy and laughter, and slowly, piece by piece, she helped him remember that. Then came the day Daniel said he would be traveling to Michigan for work, and Emma felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. She wanted to see him, to gauge for herself the changes she had encouraged, and to see if the bond they shared had grown stronger. When they met at a small coffee shop by the lake, she saw him in person, taller, a little more worn, but the tension around his shoulders was less, the heaviness in his eyes had softened, and she felt a rush of relief and something else she couldn't quite name. Their conversation started casually, about work, the weather, and mutual friends, but soon the words turned personal. Memories from college surfaced, inside jokes, shared experiences, and both laughed in a way that felt familiar and comforting. And Emma realized that despite the distance and the pain, their connection was still strong, maybe even stronger because it had endured hardship. And as they walked along the lake, Daniel began to open up about his journey, how he had started to eat better, how he had taken walks, how he had called an old friend and felt the warmth of human connection again. Emma noticed that he smiled more easily now, that his eyes carried a lighter spark, that the heaviness he had spoken of had begun to lift, and it made her heart swell, proud of him, but also aware of the subtle tension that lingered between them, a tension born of closeness, shared vulnerability, and unspoken feelings. As they sat on a bench overlooking the water, Daniel said quietly, "Emma, I don't think I could have done this without you," and the words struck her, not just because of their gratitude, but because of the vulnerability behind them, a raw honesty that few people ever allowed themselves to express. She reached out and touched his hand lightly, a gesture that conveyed comfort and connection, and Daniel didn't pull away, their fingers brushing, holding for a moment longer than necessary, and in that silence they both sensed the shift, the subtle undercurrent that was moving them closer, not just as friends, but perhaps as something more. Emma wanted to say something, to acknowledge the feeling, but she didn't. Instead, she let the moment linger, letting their shared history and recent struggles speak for themselves. Over the next few days, Daniel stayed in Michigan, and Emma found herself thinking about him constantly, wondering if he was lonely at night, wondering if he remembered their shared laughter, wondering if he, like her, was sensing the change between them. And she couldn't deny the flutter in her chest when she imagined him smiling at her, hearing his voice even in her mind. It was a new kind of feeling, one that was thrilling, yet also frightening, because it reminded her that hearts could be complicated, and that helping someone heal could awaken emotions you hadn't expected. As they met for walks, coffee, and casual lunches, Emma continued to encourage Daniel gently, suggesting small things that would help him regain confidence, reminding him of his strengths, praising his small victories, and listening when he faltered. Sometimes she would see him hesitate before speaking, the weight of the past holding him back, and she would smile, reminding him that it was okay to be slow, okay to feel, okay to be human. And each day, each conversation, each laugh and small gesture built a bridge between them, a bridge sturdy enough to hold their shared emotions and hopes. Daniel admitted that he had started journaling again, writing down thoughts that had been stuck in his mind, and Emma encouraged it, saying that reflection was a form of healing, and he told her that her words had reminded him of who he was, of the man capable of love, laughter, and resilience, and Emma felt a quiet pride, proud not just of him, but of the bond they had nurtured, the trust they had rebuilt, the delicate way in which they had begun to rely on each other again. One afternoon, they walked through a small park near the lake, the air crisp and clear, the leaves falling gently around them, and Daniel spoke of his fear of facing life alone, of how the breakup had made him doubt himself, doubt his worth, and Emma held the conversation gently, guiding him with questions that helped him realize that his strength was not measured by the relationship he had lost, but by the way he had faced it, and by the courage he showed in moving forward. She reminded him that he was not defined by his past mistakes or heartbreak, but by his resilience and ability to care deeply. Their connection deepened in ways neither of them expected, each moment together building trust, each shared memory or private joke strengthening the bond, and Emma realized that what she was feeling was more than friendship, more than concern. It was something tender and profound, a quiet romantic longing that had grown from years of familiarity and the intimacy of shared pain. She wondered if Daniel felt it too, but she didn't ask, letting the closeness grow naturally, giving them both space to feel without pressure. By the time Daniel's visit ended, both of them were aware of the change, subtle but undeniable, the way he lingered at parting, the way he looked at her with a softness that had not been there before, the way his hand brushed hers as they said goodbye, lingering a moment longer than necessary, and Emma felt a pang of longing, mixed with hope, and a gentle fear of what that meant. She wondered if helping him heal had also helped awaken feelings that had lain dormant. When Daniel left, Emma watched from the train station as he disappeared into the crowd, her heart heavy and light at the same time, heavy with the thought of missing him, light with the knowledge that he was stronger now, more like himself, capable of facing the world again. And as she walked home, she thought about the days ahead, about how she would continue to support him from afar, about the delicate bond they had nurtured, and the feelings that now existed between them, quiet, gentle, and full of possibility. That night, Emma sat by the window, staring at the city lights, thinking about Daniel, about the vulnerability he had shared, about the laughter in quiet moments, about the closeness that had grown in such a short time, and she realized that she was no longer just helping a friend, she was part of a journey of healing, part of something larger than herself, something that might change both their lives, and she allowed herself to hope, to imagine, to feel the flutter of anticipation that came from knowing that hearts could heal together. And in that quiet night, Emma understood that the most profound connections were not built overnight, but through patience, care, and a willingness to stand beside someone through the darkest moments, and she knew that for Daniel, she had been that presence. And perhaps for herself too, she had rediscovered a closeness she had long forgotten, and as sleep came, she smiled softly, knowing that tomorrow would bring new moments, new conversations, and new ways to help him continue to grow, while also navigating the subtle, tender feelings that had begun to blossom between them. After Daniel returned home, the distance between them returned too, but their connection did not fade. Calls continued, texts were constant, and sometimes they shared long silences that somehow felt comforting rather than empty. Emma noticed the subtle changes in him, how he seemed lighter, more confident in his words, how his laughter carried a little more ease, and she felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that the small steps they had taken together were now adding up, that he was no longer weighed down by grief the way he had been. Yet there was a new feeling that lingered, one that neither of them had fully acknowledged, a tender pull between them, delicate but undeniable. Daniel started opening up about his days again, telling Emma stories of work, of friends he had reconnected with, of small victories like cooking a meal for himself or finishing a book he had left unfinished, and Emma listened, offering encouragement, laughing with him at moments that were light, and gently guiding him when he doubted himself. He admitted that he had started planning small adventures, short trips to explore nearby towns, and even considered joining a weekend class in photography, something he had loved in college, and Emma felt a thrill of pride knowing she had helped him regain a sense of purpose. One evening, Daniel called her in a tone that was softer, almost shy, and admitted that he had started to feel stronger, more like himself, and that he had begun to imagine a life beyond the heartbreak, a life that included hope and possibility. And Emma smiled quietly at her kitchen table, feeling warmth spread through her chest, because she knew that her patience, her guidance, her simple presence had made this possible. Yet there was something more, a subtle undercurrent, a feeling that their bond had grown into something neither of them expected, something that hovered between friendship and something more profound. Over time, Daniel shared more personal thoughts, admitting fears he had never voiced aloud, confessing doubts about whether he could ever trust himself to love again, whether he could open his heart without being hurt, and Emma responded not with solutions, but with steady presence, reminding him gently that love was not about perfection, but about courage, about showing up even when it was scary, about being willing to care for someone while also protecting yourself. And in those conversations, Daniel began to feel a sense of stability he hadn't known since the breakup, a quiet reassurance that someone cared deeply and consistently for him. Their conversations grew more playful, filled with shared memories, jokes only they understood, and moments of vulnerability that allowed both of them to see the real person beneath the masks they wore for the world. And Emma noticed how Daniel's tone had changed, how he no longer sounded weighed down, how he laughed fully again, and she realized that the bond they had nurtured was more than friendship. It had become a safe space, a place where healing could take place, where emotions could be shared without fear, and where both could feel seen and understood in ways they hadn't experienced for years. Daniel eventually admitted something that surprised even him, that he had begun to look forward to their calls, to their messages, that he felt a warmth in his chest when Emma sent a simple text asking about his day, and Emma, listening, felt her heart skip, recognizing the feelings that mirrored her own, the quiet romantic pull that had begun to grow, delicate but persistent, and she let it exist, letting them both feel it without naming it yet, allowing the trust and care they had built to serve as a foundation for what might come next. One afternoon, Daniel sent a message that simply said, "I feel better. Stronger. Like I'm not lost anymore," and Emma felt a surge of relief and happiness, because she knew how far he had come, how much courage it had taken for him to move through the pain, and how her guidance, her patience, and her care had played a part in that. She texted back, "I'm proud of you, Daniel. You've done this yourself. I've only been here to remind you that you could," and he responded with a series of heart emojis, playful and sincere, and a message that made her smile, "I don't know what I'd do without you." Days turned into weeks, and their bond strengthened further. Emma noticed that the subtle tension between them was growing, the gentle attraction, the moments when a word, a touch, or a glance carried more weight than it should, yet neither of them rushed. Neither forced the feeling, instead allowing it to grow naturally, nurtured by shared vulnerability, mutual respect, and the care they had given each other during the hardest days. And Emma felt that slow, quiet thrill of a connection that could become something lasting, something meaningful, something beyond friendship. One evening, as they spoke over the phone, Daniel admitted that he was thinking of dating again someday, not immediately, but eventually, someone who could respect the healing he had done and who could be part of his life with honesty and care. And Emma listened, her heart tightening a little at the thought, because she realized that part of her hoped that someday, maybe, he would consider her, but she stayed quiet, letting him explore his feelings while supporting him as she always had, and that patience itself became an act of love, gentle and mature. Daniel shared memories of the breakup he hadn't told anyone, the moments of doubt, the fights that escalated, and the nights he spent replaying conversations in his mind, and Emma listened without judgment, offering gentle reminders that mistakes did not define him, that the heartbreak was not a reflection of his worth, and in hearing her calm, steady voice, Daniel felt an unfamiliar peace, a sense that he was understood, valued, and cared for in a way that was rare, and he began to trust himself again, to see his own worth, to recognize that he could face life without being overwhelmed by loss. Emma began to reflect on what they had built, the patience, the care, the quiet guidance, the shared moments of laughter and tears, and realized that she had grown too, that helping Daniel had reminded her of her own resilience, her own capacity to care deeply, and the joy of being needed, the fulfillment of standing beside someone and witnessing their transformation. And she allowed herself to feel the delicate romantic pull as something natural, as part of the connection they had nurtured. Without rushing it, without forcing it, letting it exist alongside their friendship. One night, Daniel called unexpectedly, voice soft and hesitant, and admitted something that surprised Emma. "Emma, I don't think I could have made it through the worst days without you, without your voice, without your support," and Emma's heart ached with a mix of pride, warmth, and something deeper, knowing that she had helped him heal, but also recognizing that in the process, she had become part of something bigger, part of his heart in a way that could not be undone, and she replied softly, "Daniel, I've only been here because I care about you. Always." After that call, Emma sat quietly in her room, realizing the magnitude of what they had shared, the depth of connection, the trust that had grown, and how the feelings between them had matured into something tender, delicate, and real. She understood that she had not saved him, but had walked beside him, allowing him to find his own strength, and in doing so, they had both grown, both discovered resilience, and perhaps even a capacity for love that was deeper than either had imagined. Daniel began to take more confident steps into life again, calling friends, meeting colleagues, exploring new hobbies, and Emma encouraged every small victory, cheering him on quietly, feeling joy in his successes, while also recognizing the quiet romantic undercurrent that now threaded through their conversations, a pull that was gentle but insistent, a sign that the connection they had nurtured was evolving naturally, beautifully, without pressure or expectation. Then came the moment neither of them had anticipated, a simple message from Daniel late one night, "Emma, I think I'm ready to see what this could be, us," and Emma felt a rush of emotion, relief, anticipation, joy, and a quiet thrill of love, because she had felt the same, had recognized the pull long before he said the words, and now it was out in the open, tender and promising, a new chapter ready to begin. They talked that night, slowly, carefully, about what they meant to each other, about the care and patience that had brought them here, about the trust that had been built over months of hardship, and Emma realized that their journey had not just been about healing, but about discovering a deep connection that could withstand pain, distance, and uncertainty, and Daniel admitted that he had never felt so seen, so valued, and so safe with anyone before, and Emma felt her heart swell, knowing that she had been part of that journey with him. The following weeks were filled with cautious exploration, gentle dates, long conversations, and moments of closeness that neither forced but both embraced, and Emma noticed how natural it felt to be near him, how easy it was to laugh, to share, to care, without fear or hesitation, and Daniel mirrored that, showing tenderness, patience, and an openness that had been absent for years, and in those moments, Emma knew that the bond they had built through pain had now blossomed into something tender, romantic, and real. By the time the season changed, Daniel had become not just healed, but whole, not just her friend, but someone who cherished her deeply, and Emma realized that helping him through heartbreak had not just strengthened him, but had transformed their relationship, deepened their bond, and opened the door to a love that was patient, enduring, and grounded in shared experience, care, and mutual respect. And as they sat together watching the sun set over the lake near her home, hands brushing, hearts aligned, Emma understood that this was only the beginning of a story neither of them had expected, but both were ready to live. And in that quiet evening, the warmth of connection between them felt like a promise, a reminder that love could grow from patience, friendship, and unwavering support, that hearts could heal together, and that sometimes the most meaningful relationships began not with fireworks, but with steady presence, gentle guidance, and the courage to walk through life together, even when the path was uncertain. Emma smiled as Daniel looked at her, and she knew in that moment that everything they had been through, the heartbreak, the distance, the quiet nights of listening and guiding, had led to this, a place of tenderness, love, and the beginning of a shared future. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the water, she realized that sometimes the greatest love stories were not about instant passion, but about the quiet, patient journey of standing beside someone, helping them heal, and discovering that in the process, you had both found something real, enduring, and beautiful. And so, Emma and Daniel began the next chapter of their lives together, stronger, closer, and ready to face whatever came next, their hearts full of hope, gratitude, and the gentle, unwavering certainty that they had found each other, not just as friends, but as partners in life, love, and everything in between, a story that had started with heartbreak and had blossomed into something profoundly, beautifully human.